Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our second webinar of Burnie Group's Automate webinar series. Today, we're talking about expert tips to boost bot productivity with intelligent orchestration. So really excited to have you all join us, whether this is your first one joining us in the series or if you came to our last webinar last week. Thank you for joining and taking time out of your day to listen to Adrian and I talk about this very exciting topic. Before we get into the details about this capability, just want to cover some housekeeping items. So before, like last week, this session will be recorded and sent to all participants at the end of the webinar, and you guys will be able to share it with your own network and colleagues. We will be going on listen-only mode, so if you do have questions, please add them into the chat, and we'll have someone monitoring, and we'll have a QA session at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, we can get into the main body of the webinar. So in ways of introduction, my name is Najeeb Saour. I lead the technology and automation practice at Burnie Group. Been here for about a year and really deep expertise in artificial intelligence and intelligent automation. And I'm very, very happy to introduce my friend and colleague, Adrian.
Yeah, thanks, Najeeb. Hello, everyone. My name's Adrian Golding. I'm the VP of Customer Success at C2. I've been with C2 for about a year. And I think in probably terms of remit, think anything post-sales. So the team and I focus on professional services, implementation, onboarding, customer success management, the whole relationship piece, and then technical support and training for partners, training for customers, and training for our own employees. Do you want me to give an overview of C2 at this point?
Yeah,
Najeeb?
please.
Yeah, so C2, we've been around about 4 years. I think to give you a sense of why we're here, it's basically, I think there's probably people on this call that have lived or are living with some of the problems and challenges of scheduling RPA processes. And so that was the challenge that the team set out to answer, basically. So it was really focused on reducing time around operational activities and also improving the scheduling of RPA processes. I think actually now we can see a broader use case beyond just RPA and automation in general. So C2 provides an automation management platform, is the way to think about it. And we work with hundreds of customers, effectively helping them not only make their RPA program more optimal, but helping them with the growth that they might see from the business and also how they scale to get towards automation maturity and hyper-automation. So that's what we do.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. So before we get into really the context about the capability we're introducing today, I'm just sharing a slide to help our audience on the call and those watching potentially afterwards, just define what we mean by intelligent orchestration. So what I'm really going to articulate is the context around why this capability came into the market, why it's important for automation, technology, operations, and even strategy leaders to be aware of, and defining the three core main capabilities of what it actually does. So for those on the call and those watching later, I think everyone can agree that the investments in artificial intelligence and automation have grown and are going to continue to grow. Our core software, like our ERPs, our CRMs, our workflows, and our HRIS are still going to remain very critical to our backbone of our organization. But the automations we put on top of it are going to keep growing because we're able to do more and more with advances in automation technology and as we look further up the value chain into artificial intelligence. So what this really means is our portfolio of digital workers are going to be increasing. So we'll have more digital workers working side by side with our human workforce that will require slightly different techniques for how to manage and govern them. And when I say digital workers, I'm referring to a portfolio of tools that could, refer to robotics process automation, which are really software robots targeted to automating very rules-based mundane activities. It could be intelligent document processing robots, which are really focused on extracting data from non-structured forms, so things like an invoice or a contract. Then we have large language models and Gen AI. So there's been a lot of buzz, particularly on this and how organizations can prototype and leverage this. So this capability is about extracting context and engagement in the context of dealing with very, very large sets of unstructured data. And last but not least, there could be bots around advanced AI and machine learning, which leverage things like predictive analytics to forecast models or scenario-based modeling. So regardless of the context or the tools that are being used, the proliferation of automation is getting a lot of traction. And as our portfolio of digital workers grow, we're going to need to basically tackle them in different manners. So the first point there around the requiring different techniques to manage and govern, as our portfolio grows with less work being done by people, we need to just have the right constructs in place to make sure the right work is being done at the right time, at the right priority by the infrastructure that's supporting all of these bots, whether it's RPA or generative AI. The second main piece is multi-tool and multimodal architectures are coming. As we move into higher levels of artificial intelligence, it's more than likely that organizations are going to have more than one tool and more than one partner, and being able to orchestrate the work effectively between maybe various AI models with your robotics process automation bots or your intelligent document processing is going to be very critical. And the mechanisms for doing that are going to become much more important to make sure the experience is seamless and we're getting the throughput that's required. And last but not least is, as our portfolio of automations grow, so will spending, and so will the line required to be able to tie it back to benefits and ROI. So a lot of the newer artificial intelligence type capabilities are coming out. They're primarily cloud-based, and you can obviously do internal deployments, but the spending there needs to be sort of tracked and managed back to the efficacy and effectiveness of the models so that we can tie it back to an improved throughput or revenue gen or some sort of benefits tracking. So the context around this growing portfolio of automation is where the capability of intelligent orchestration comes into play. What it's really focused on is ensuring that the infrastructure behind these bots, regardless of the capability, RPA, IDP, they're working on the right things at the right time in relation to all of the other work that's in the backlog. So the three main capabilities you're going to see at the bottom of the slide that were when we talk about intelligent orchestration throughout this webinar, just to sort of ground us in the same understanding, are firstly business-driven digital workforce optimization. So envision a world where you can onboard a whole bunch of digital workers to work on a set of processes, but each process has a configurable priority attached to it so that when volume spikes come in, this orchestration layer can actually, in the back end, make sure the infrastructure is moving towards the most important piece of work at that time. This is really critical as we deal with higher complexity processes, and even more critical as we deal less with robotics process automation, which is absolutely critical, but yet more predictable. As we move into less predictable throughput in AI and ML models, this becomes really critical to manage the infrastructure being put to the right places. The second capability is automated operations. So with more digital workers, these digital workers, unlike you and I that sit at a desk or at home, they sit on a server or a computer. We've all worked with software. We've all worked with technology before. Internet goes out, software update comes in that potentially breaks something and locks you out. The more of that we can automate in the background, the less risky it is to deploy digital workers en masse. So the capability of intelligent orchestration also orchestrates some of the sort of, tier one, level one support type incidents that could happen when you're putting software on infrastructure. And last but not least, and this ties back to the ROI implications that I mentioned earlier, is real-time insights and reporting. So getting a good view on what bots are up, what are down, how many things have been processed, what's working, what's not working, what's working really badly that we need to remediate, what's working really well that we need to reinforce. All of these can help us not only manage our portfolios of workers in a more effective manner, it can help us draw the line back to ROI a little bit more tightly. So as we increase our spending in AI and automation, the justification becomes almost at the tip of your fingers, as opposed to looking through reports and finding out the effectiveness of your portfolio to determine how much value is being driven. So as Adrian and I talk more about intelligent orchestration over the next 20 minutes or so, this is really the capability we're talking about. So Adrian, I'll pass it over to you just in case I missed anything, and your views into why intelligent orchestration is really something organizations should have on their radar as they look to scale their AI and automation.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Najeeb. Good overview. So, I think if you just take the first piece around SLAs, SLAs aren't new to businesses. They've been around for years in terms of external and internal. I think what we observe is, and this is partly to do with the orchestration capabilities within RPA, is that effectively when you start to build automation, you might get back to what we call static triggers. So either time-based, event-based, etc., which don't necessarily mean that you adhere to the SLAs of the business. So we already have a disconnect. So for us, when we think about intelligent orchestration and dynamic intelligent orchestration, working out processes based on the SLA of the business is absolutely fundamental. It goes back to why we're doing what we're doing and making sure we're more aligned. In terms of how that happens, C2 will effectively just move processes, robots, items around according to your RPA estate to effectively deliver against what needs to be done at what time on the SLA. Very different to the static approach. And what we see with the static approach is that effectively you may have a process running at 8 in the morning, it might finish by 11, that might be fine for a few months, and then effectively the process grows, there's more items, and then it doesn't complete, or it does complete, but it actually stops another process working. And so that means then obviously SLAs are missed. And so as the company grows, not only does it make that orchestration more difficult, but effectively scaling becomes more challenging as well. So I think that's why the SLA piece is so integral. The automated operations, our platform actually just kicks off and restarts processes. It does it out of hours. It reduces the need for manual intervention. I think when we think about how people automate again, the irony is that you automate and then build a team to watch the automations. So you're replacing human activity, but then getting humans to watch the automation, which is kind of counterintuitive. So automated operations for us is about, as we set out to do, reducing time operational activities and actually improving the scheduling process. And so we see lots of clients now where if they effectively ran their processes from 9 to 5, typical working day, they can now do that out of hours and obviously get higher utilization and effectively dynamically schedule their work more effectively. So I think just 2 points to really sort of lay in there. And I've got some examples as we go through this that I think will really demonstrate that as well and bring it to life.
Yeah, I think, Adrian, why don't we just cover maybe some real world examples from industry that you've seen where the capability or the concept has been applied?
Okay, great. Yeah, there are some sensitivities around naming some clients depending on what industry it is. So I've got 2 anonymous ones that I can talk to, and I'll give you a sense of who they are and what industry they're in. So the first one is a large US mortgage company. They are about 1.6 billion in revenue. They manage mortgages to the value of 122 billion. So large company. When we first started speaking to them, and we know this space really well from our own experience, utilization wasn't great. That tends to be what we hear from most of our clients and prospects when we're talking to them. But they're also missing SLAs. And so as the conversations progressed, one of the things we were trying to work out was, what's the business case to get C2 in? That largely focused around reducing licenses. And we see a lot of value in that. I mean, that can help. I think one of the things we're trying to straddle is that actually you may not want to reduce your licenses. You may want to use them more for more automations. And we can give examples of that as I go through this. But that was a business case. We did effectively set up the C2 platform. They reduced their licenses by 30%. So tick in the box, great job. But actually, even though they're hitting the SLAs now, one of the things we then spoke about was, well, actually, your turnaround for mortgage applications is 8 hours. That's what you were doing historically. You're now hitting that SLA, but is that really the best outcome? So, you may have automated a process and saved FTE. You may have now used dynamic scheduling and reduce your licenses, but what's that against the business in terms of revenue generation or lost revenue? And so the Centre of Excellence went and spoke to the business owners and said, look, ultimately, if we could improve the SLA, what would you like it to be? And so the conversations went on, and effectively it went down from 8-hour turnaround to 1-hour turnaround. So quite a significant difference. The reality is to do that, they'd have to buy more licenses again, which was a business case again in terms of looking at that. But the reality is from having a quick 1-hour turnaround, they were effectively able to secure more mortgage business. And the revenue increase on that was quite significant and actually offset any costs for more licenses. Now, they wouldn't share the exact figure with us, but what they did say is that increase is effectively paid for the whole RPA program. And the reason I love that is not only because of the increased revenue to the business, but also the starting point for the business case. And you mentioned this in terms of ROI, Najeeb, is, where do you start? I think license savings is an obvious one when we think about how we intelligently orchestrate. How do we get that utilization up? But actually, we can very easily flip it into business outcomes. And that's why this example really resonates for me in terms of actually the business benefited more in revenue than it did from the cost savings. They end up buying more licenses. That's a good example, I think, of how a journey evolves from starting off with one thought process and ending up with a different result.
That's phenomenal. I mean, this capability, as we know, and your examples, can be applied to RPA, but that's the most tangible one we can talk to now. I think what I mentioned before, just keep in mind, is as we do more with the AI landscape, this type of capability is going to be really, really, really important, particularly as cost transparency is not necessarily as easy as, hey, we have an RPA license, it costs this much, when you're sort of going to other models. So I think that as we apply these learnings and these success stories, I encourage our user group on the call and folks listening afterwards is to think about how this concept can help with tools more broadly, because not only is the use case allowed you to use your infrastructure more effective, particularly when you look at multimodal pieces, even with just RPA, you can use these orchestration layers to potentially do arbitrage between tools, go to a Power Apps for lower cost, low code, and then go to a different RPA tool to do the heavy processing for you. So the ability to fluidly connect them is really, really critical, particularly as we move up into more RPA and then more AI.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's something that we're trialing at the moment with clients in terms of universal queues. So the ability to actually queue different items from different software, which speaks to that broader automation piece. Yeah. I've got another example, which I think is really around automated operations. So if you think that was around intelligent orchestration and the SLAs, this one speaks to the automated operations piece. UK bank, about 7 billion in revenues, huge RPA program. They had about 300 robots when we first started working with them, and now about 450. And they've basically gone on to a journey where they're now in a hyper automation mode, as we call it. I actually did a webinar on that a few weeks ago, which you can find on our LinkedIn site if you're interested, around hyper automation, what is it, and some examples. We originally agreed to work with them for 2 months. They've got 5 business units, 5 environments around RPA. We put C2 into one of them, so it's just purely C2. And we were working quite well in terms of the orchestration, etc. What happened is we had an outage overnight. And when it came back up, effectively C2 kicked in. And, I think the question is, when you have an outage, is you've got a lot of processes that haven't run. You walk into a mess the next day as a controller. And I think the first question is, well, where do I start? Like, what is the most important process? How much workload is there? And that's a pretty hard calculation, I think, when you're in that situation. So C2 will take care of that dynamically. We actually ended up getting back on track within about 2 to 3 hours, where we didn't miss any SLAs, and actually all processes were restarted, running and completing within that 2-3 hour period to get back on track. The real, takeaway here is we actually had a night and day situation. So we could see an environment with C2 in it where that just happened automatically. But we also had 4 other environments with the manual controller operation still in place. And at this point, what became an exercise of working for 2 months to try and understand the value became really clear cut, because for the ones that were working manually in a traditional style, it took basically over 24 hours to get back on track, working out which processes, getting them restarted, trying to work out the workloads. And also there were SLAs missed, and in a regulatory environment, there's some really big impact of missing some of those SLAs, especially from a financial perspective. So there were some fines involved. So I think, for this particular bank, what was a 2-month decision became very clear. It was, no, we need to roll this out everywhere, because the impact of what's just happened and the impact of us meeting the SLAs in the C2 environment is night and day compared to where we are now across the rest of the organization. And I think when you think about automated operations, we call it that. What does it actually mean? That, for me, really brings home what the value of that particular piece of intelligent orchestration is. It's the ability to have stuff rerun, restart, dynamically schedule without actually touching it, having alerts that tell you what's going on, and effectively you're just looking at that in the background rather than manually controlling, monitoring, making decisions. So yeah, we effectively rolled out to this.
Particularly as we look into designing these components, because as you said, when you put these orchestration layers, the intelligent orchestration layers, when something spins up, instead of coordinating between lines of business and be like which one goes up first, and it's a very stressful situation, it's designed up front. It's tested up front. It's load balanced as part of your sit or your pat. And you sort of figure out, okay, when this comes up, how do you deal with a failover? And it's effectively part of your DR program is when you spin it back up, it will serendipitously make sure everything is back to what is orchestrated and organized as a requirement from the business line. So another thing to consider here is, particularly as we look at infrastructure for digital workers, it's not realistic for all digital workers to be doing all processes all the times, particularly if you're in a regulated business. Certain servers need to be compliant. Certain servers can't have data that another server has. So a good way to think about this for RPA and beyond is like almost like segmentation of your digital workers that can be orchestrated in sort of like farms, as opposed to one large pile of digital workers, because smaller and mid-sized organizations can likely do have larger portions of their workforce be able to do all of the processes. But particularly enterprises that are regulated, there are rules and maybe even costs around having heavier infrastructure or data that can't be housed in a certain line of business.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What we do see, and obviously it's different for each business, is that you're right. We work with clients and they have those restrictions in place, or governance models around some of that. We see that change over time. I think when intelligent orchestration starts to come in, the business value, where you can possibly rely on the automation from a less error aspect, then there's a lot of internal conversations around, well, did we get that decision right? Was it right to do that? It made sense in the old world, but in this world, actually, maybe we could be a bit more open in terms of how we provide that access. And so a lot of times we'll see our customer go on a journey where, the first time we work with them, no, we can't use it for that, we can't use it for that. But as time goes on, that will get pushed internally as a dialogue, and actually they do free up and make changes, which again adds more value to the orchestration. So absolutely right. Different businesses, yeah.
Adrian, you had one more case study to go through, but I know we're coming on 8 minutes, but I'd love to sort of ask you another question. And I chimed in on my perspectives of where do you see the sort of future of the capability coming in within RPA, and then as we go into the broader AI places, like how do you see this capability coming into play?
Yeah, I think as you started off, I think we can see a use case beyond RPA. Managing automation across the business landscape and all the different technologies is going to become fundamental, and that orchestration is only going to play more parts in it. I think IDP is a great example of that. Machine learning is probably how it's done now. I think AI will change that considerably in terms of the opportunities available. And I think when you think about probably more citizen development like Power Automate, things like Copilot, where we use AI to actually develop and write our processes, will become more prevalent, which will free up more time to do more value-add activities than actually just writing the process itself. So I think that's directionally where it would go. We're not there yet, but I think that's where it's going to get to.
Yeah, I think there's so much changing in capabilities that'll move on beyond RPA, and the options for orchestrating between tools are also going to change. So you can use a product similar to C2, where you have a layer that's pre-programmed with all the SLAs and it'll sort of manage it in the background. But what I know with my clients that are doing currently, when they're kicking off a process in another tool, they'll just sort of integrate it into the design of the automation, kick off something on the other side, and the sort of routing and reporting is done in two different places as opposed to one console. So that can still be an effective design pattern. I think where this type of capability of intelligent orchestration comes to play is portfolio level across multiple automations, because I think if you just look at it in isolation, it might just be much easier and architecturally straightforward to just, hey, I'm going to, automate a process with an RPA bot and trigger this ML engine and take the extract. But if you look into the orchestration and the support of that, you don't have a view into how both of them are performing. And it may be two different teams, to be honest. So I think for me, it's not just, as you articulated, the capabilities changing, it's how organizations set themselves up to support not just RPA, which are typically within a COE, but the AI stuff may or may not be within that same team. It may or may not be governed by that same team and funded by that same team and resources staffed by that same team. It might be in 5 or 6 different teams. So figuring that out, I think structurally, as an operating model perspective on where automation AI play is going to be really critical, so that you're able to monitor everything holistically as much as possible.
Yeah, I think it's a great shout. And we see that with our current client base in terms of how they're organized, and it will definitely have to be rethought as it moves forward towards that more broader, higher level landscape, as you say, because it's going to get more and more integrated.
Awesome. I do see a question coming in from, do you think your technology would have application where the processes are not automated paper processes, but real physical, discrete manufacturing processes with various levels of automation? Let me give that some thought.
That's a great question. Yeah.
So I can think of a couple ways to answer that question. So can this tool help your machinery decide which which SKU to pull in and what to build first and push out? Likely not. But where manufacturing has a lot of growth is in the Internet of Things space, where you're putting in signals as part of your supply chain in your manufacturing process and your distribution, where when there is an outage or when there is a breakage that can cause some sort of proactive maintenance, that can go to an automation. And that automation can be governed by an SLA-based orchestration, such as the C2 capability, but it all really depends on scale. But yeah, this tool isn't about automating like physical robots working more effectively, although conceptually the idea can be put into the models that govern how those automations work. Or do you have any other thoughts on that, Adrian?
No, I think that's a good response. Yeah, we're not doing that currently. I think you're right to make that distinction between, a robot process in itself versus actually some of those escalations or where things need to be reprioritized.
Yeah, and maybe as we wait for more questions to come in, I know you had a third case study that we were hoping to cover. I think we have some time to cover that while we wait for more questions to come in.
Yeah, this one I can actually name. It's a company called New Day. They are a financial services company. They're about 650 million in revenue. I've done a recent webinar with Nikki North, who's the head of automation, and we've actually got a case study coming up. So if anyone's more interested in the details after this, look out for it. It'll be on our LinkedIn site. We got all their processes is about 52. They do about 120,000 automations a month, onboarded within 4 days. Nikki, and I'm going to read from this because I'm going to quote her. She basically said they saw instant benefit realization, and with C2, our automations just work. We hear that from lots of clients, basically. I think the story here is they had a really interesting first month. So to date, when we think about automated operations, for Nikki, that meant people coming in at goodwill over the weekend to try and keep an overview of processes that were running, because they needed them to work at the weekend, but she didn't have a 24/7 operational team. So very much goodwill. Not a great model in terms of how we work with employees, but they're a very tight team. They switched off people coming in over weekends in the first month. They just had such confidence in the fact that C2 was running it, and they would have alerts if anything happened, that they said, don't worry about coming in. Don't need to. Absolutely fine. They also had an outage within that first month, which was end of day. Now, typically that would mean the team staying late. They would have to, here we go. Let's wait for it to come back up. We're going to have to be here. We're going to have to then kick in our manual processes, all the decision making we spoke about earlier on. They didn't have to do that. And they didn't try and do it because C2 was automatically restarting it all. And again, we were back on track within, I think, just under 2 hours, and we hit 100% of SLAs. So that first month was really interesting for them. I mean, I think the decision not to go in was a good one. I think having the outage was unfortunate, but in both cases, there were great examples of how that platform and the intelligent orchestration just solved problems that they were dealing with every day beforehand that they didn't have to again. The other piece around it is the scaling. So, sometimes, why do you need this? I think it makes orchestration easier. It makes the controlling and the resources that you use for that, you can use them more effectively. But scale is about building a bigger program with either the same or less resources. When you look at the 7-day usage on their Blue Prism licenses, they're actually pretty much using all 20. When they put C2 in, they'd actually come down to using a third of that license. Now, that could either be a license reduction or it could actually be more automation. Because of the nature of what they're doing and because of some of the things that have happened in the world, they have been running effectively, financial support help processes with all their clients, which causes spikes in volume. So although they were now obviously using less of the BP licenses, they also have the capacity to spin up and spin down activities according to large volumes based on regulatory requirements or business decisions around how to help people with financial arrangements. So again, that's allowed them to scale their operations, but without actually increasing any license costs. So as I say, if you want to know more about that, I'm conscious of the time, you'll see a case study coming out very shortly on the C2 LinkedIn website.
Awesome. I think we're past time. We did have a quick question coming in around the typical implementation time for the C2 platform and how organizations ensure a smooth transition.
It's around 2 weeks, basically. We have done it quicker. It does have some pre-requirements, but obviously it's your RPA program. You know it. We just ask you to download that to us and we'll work with you to get it up and running within a 2-week period.
Fantastic. Well, I know we're a bit over. Thank you all for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you guys next week, where our topic will be intelligent document processing, where we'll have one of our clients, Suman Banerjee, join us to talk about real-world applications of intelligent document processing. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate the time, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for having me, Najeeb. Really appreciate it.
No problem, Adrian. Bye.
All right, see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.